Hello. If you're able to, please close your eyes. Take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. Relax your shoulders. Unclench your jaw. Take another deep breath in. And another breath out. You can open your eyes now. My name is David, and welcome to Mindful Moments. How are you today? I hope you're well. I'm very good, thank you. I feel like I'm probably in the best spirits I've been in since the beginning of the year. Took the beginning of the year slowly, slightly started to increase the pace at the beginning of February, and now I feel like I'm in a real groove. I'm someone who really benefits from being in the flow of things and being in a routine. I love a routine, and I feel like I am pushing myself healthily in a good way in every aspect of my routine right now, and it feels really great. It feels really, really good, and I feel rested enough to do that, which is nice. I'm very proud of myself because I've rested enough to make sure I was in the best possible shape before starting to push myself. And I haven't always done things in that sequence before. So I feel pleased. I feel like I've grown. I feel like I'm really taking good care of myself. Good for me. Look at me go. But yes, I feel very good. Thank you. And yeah, I was thinking about how I started this year slowly and didn't do anything particularly intense, but I did continue to do everything that I did consistently. And that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about consistency generally. I am quite a consistent person across the board. Far more consistent than I used to be, I'd say, a few years ago in my life. And consistency is something that I've worked really hard at. And I have a few thoughts on. It's rare that I share thoughts from a position of, I think I'm actually doing this thing quite well. Here's not advice, but here's what I think about it. Usually I kind of share more ongoing thoughts, but this is something that I actually feel really strongly about and actually feel like I'm doing really well at. There are a lot of areas in my life where I am very consistent now. I'm very consistent with my content. Obviously, it's my career, it's my full-time thing, and I'm very consistent with that. I'm very consistent with my exercise. I've got a very consistent routine, consistent schedule, and I know that that's come about because I've worked really hard at being a more consistent person. I can very much see how now I'm a much more consistent person than I was, say, 2 years ago. And consistency is something that's really valuable and takes a lot of time to build, but is very, very worth building. So I just want to talk about my experiences in building consistency and getting to the point where I feel like I can trust myself to do things because I know I've proven myself to be a consistent person in many areas. So yeah, that's what I'd like to talk about today, if that's okay with you. Consistency is an incredibly helpful skill. Doing anything consistently over time builds skill, aptitude, and gets the best results. It's the most efficient way to get results out of something, doing it consistently over an amount of time, which is why it's something that we aim for in so many areas of our lives. There are so many areas where being consistent is helpful. I struggle to think of areas of life that it's not helpful to be consistent in. And knowing that, but not necessarily being the most patient person by nature and struggling before really to form disciplined habits, I really struggled to build consistency as well because consistency is really difficult. I feel like consistency is one of those things that's simple in nature, but that doesn't make it easy at all. So in the time where I've been trying to build consistency in my habits and the things that I've been doing, I've had a few realizations. The first of which is that consistency itself is the difficult thing. When you try and build consistency, I feel like you always do it in tandem with something else. So I'm trying to build consistency with exercise. I'm trying to build consistency with my work. And that means that there's always something else that you're focusing on alongside the consistency. So let me stick with the example of exercise. I'm trying to build a consistent exercise routine. You want to be consistent and you want to be better at the exercise and see results from the exercise. And sometimes the need or desire for results and progress overrides the desire to build consistency. So say I want to do 10 press-ups a day for a month. I start doing 10 press-ups a day, and I feel like in the early days, I can do more than 10 press-ups. So I do 20 press-ups the first day, 20 the next day, and 25 the third day, and then don't do any for the rest of the week because I'm tired and I've overdone it at the beginning of the week. In terms of the exercise part, I pushed myself, I went for intensity, but sometimes intensity doesn't sit very well with consistency. And that's where it's important to know that when it comes to building consistency, if building consistency is the objective, the consistency itself is the difficult part. The consistency itself is difficult enough. You don't need to add too much intensity to that. So if the goal is to build consistency, let it be to build consistency. Don't push yourself too intensely, or push intensity over consistency, because the consistency itself is the hard part. Managing to do something consistently over time, A, will bring positive results anyway, and B, is the difficult thing. It's not a case of I'm not doing enough every day. This is what I've set myself to do every day, and it's more important that I hit that target for a long time than it is I push myself really intensely and do the most that I can every day. I think that's what it is. I think sometimes it can feel quite incongruous trying to do something to the best of your ability and do it consistently, because you work on consistency to build skill. And sometimes the ultimate level of skill you have, the maximum that you're capable of, you're only capable of maintaining that for short periods of time. As you build consistency, you're actually able to carry out your maximum level of performance for longer periods of time. So at a certain point, it's more worth building consistency and getting to be more consistent with something and operating on maybe a lower level than you'd be able to perform at if you were doing it for a short amount of time, but operating at that lower level for a long amount of time to build the skill of consistency. And then once you know you can be consistent with something, and once you can trust yourself to be consistent, then trying to push yourself to the maximum of your capability. Because even then, if you slip or you're only able to maintain that maximum level for a short period of time, you know that your base level will always be a consistent one. And rather than pushing yourself really intensely, doing something for a really short period of time, and then not doing it at all, you will always be doing something at a consistent level. You will sometimes do something to your absolute maximum level, but then when that stops, you will go back to being consistent because you're used to being consistent. That's one of the best things about being consistent. Once you have a level of consistency that you're used to, you will always return to that level. If your level of consistency is here and you manage to increase it to here, when you're at your best and then you just go back to your natural performance level or your base level will be here. It won't be here anymore. And that's a really wonderful discovery. That's something I've recently discovered. As I said, beginning of this year, really wasn't pushing myself at all, but found myself just out of second nature, because I built the habit of consistency, just being consistent with things generally. Even if I wasn't doing them, even if I wasn't pushing myself massively, they were getting done to some extent. That's the other thing with consistency as well. Consistency and perfection are two different things. You don't have to do something perfectly and amazingly all the time to be consistent with it. And in a lot of cases, it's actually more valuable to do something consistently and not be perfect at it than it is to try and aim for perfection and then sometimes not even manage to do it at all, because nothing but perfection is good enough. As someone who likes to do things well and a reformed perfectionist, that's something that I've really learned as well, that honestly, it's better to do something consistently and do it at 80% than it is to try and force 100% all the time and inevitably fall short of that and either be 100 or 0. It doesn't really make any sense. If I say I'm going to do something consistently for a month, and out of those 30 days, I only managed 20. First of all, that's still a level of consistency. That's 66.6 recurring percent of consistency. And those 20 days are infinitely more valuable than 0 days would have been. So when building consistency, it's very important that we don't push intensity too hard. And we know that consistency and perfection are two very different things. And you don't have to be perfect to be consistent. As I said before, being consistent at anything means that over time you will improve. And that's part of the beauty of being consistent. Just by being consistent, you are taking care of yourself and your interests in terms of you want to get better at things. We all want to get better at things. We want to improve. We want to be at our best in things. And if we are consistent with things, we are improving. Whether we like, it's almost passive improvement. Well, not passive because you have to be, but you know what I mean? The consistency is our focus rather than improvement. But wonderfully, improvement comes along with consistency. Consistency is the vehicle and improvement is in the back seat. It's on the journey. So as long as we can trust ourselves to be consistent with things, we will improve. There's no need to wait to be perfect. And there's no need to push ourselves extremely intensely. Obviously, the golden ratio is obviously being super consistent at something at our best possible level. And over time, that means that we will improve as quickly as possible. But again, when it comes to improvement, it's not a race anywhere. I always feel like anything that I do, I want it to stick. I want it to be long term. I don't want short term results, push myself super hard, get something in the short term and then burn out, or I'm unable to replicate it, or I'm unable to continue it. I'd way rather do something properly, take a long time to do it, but do it consistently and build it over time. And for me, that means that I'll be able to do something for a long time. Everything I do, I want longevity in. I've said this before. So yeah, when it comes to building consistency with anything, time is the difficult thing. Doing it over time is the difficult thing. But if we manage to stay consistent and be consistent, the improvement will come with it. So consistency doesn't equal perfection. Intensity isn't the most important thing when we're being consistent. It's just regularity, showing up, doing it every day, and doing that over time. I say every day, whatever the time period is. I think a lot. I think about, for example, content. I think about this podcast. This podcast didn't start as this podcast. It takes a lot of work to get a podcast episode out every week. The planning, the recording, the editing, the amount of thinking that goes into it is a lot. And if I tried to start this podcast when I started doing content, I wouldn't have been able to do it every week. The reason it took me so long to start doing this is because I wanted to do it every week. I wanted to be consistent with it, but I knew I wasn't in the place where I could do that yet. This podcast, Mindful Moments, the idea started with weekly Instagram videos, 1 minute Instagram videos. And those 1 minute weekly videos, they weren't necessarily always the best. When I look back at some of the editing, the way I used to do the subtitles, I look at a lot of details and think that could have been better. And if I decided to do a video once every few weeks or sporadically, every time I posted the video, it would have been perfect. Like it would have been, the details would have been exactly as I wanted them to be. But I really wanted to build the consistency of doing a regular series based around this kind of stuff. And I knew that that meant I'd have to compromise in some areas. I knew that every single week wouldn't be my best work. And that's the other thing with being consistent. When you have a large sample size, the range is going to be a lot bigger than it is if you only do something 2 or 3 times. If I do something 2 or 3 times, it's a lot easier for me to do that perfectly. If I do it every single week, 52 videos in a year, with all the other things that are going on in my life, the likelihood is there are going to be some videos that might be below my standards. And that's the risk you take. But again, it's having the bigger picture in mind and knowing it's worth there being a few videos in there that maybe aren't to my standards, but I know that bigger picture, they are building blocks towards me being the best version of myself and towards me building the consistency that I know is necessary to be able to do this on a bigger and better scale. That takes a lot of patience as well. It takes a lot of discipline. There are loads of things that go into consistency. But as I said, It's all difficult, but it's all quite simple. So yeah, if consistency is something that you struggle with or something you're trying to build, I think it's just important to know that consistency does not equal perfection. They're not the same thing. And you don't have to be intense to be consistent either. It's actually better to do things at a level that you know you can maintain and do that over time, because the consistency itself is the hard part. You don't need to make it any more difficult. And simply by being consistent, we will improve. That's just how it works. That's all I've got today. I feel really passionately about that one. And I really feel like it's something we can all do. We're all really capable of being consistent with the things that we want to be consistent with, especially if they're things, which they tend to be, that are ultimately good for us and that we ultimately care about. I believe in you. I believe in myself too. Let's be consistent. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being here. Whatever you're doing this week, I hope you have a wonderful one.